Right, we'll be reflecting on the G20 empowerment of women working, and we will in a short moment. In fact, I understand we have him on the line right now, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, from the Tshwane University of Technology's Vice Chancellor. Very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. And, this year's gathering aimed to influence future G20 policy, ensuring women's financial empowerment remains central to the global institutional and economic reforms. What has stood out for you as you observed the conversations that took place, the speakers, and your input as a university?
What has really stood out for us is just the realization how much women inclusion would make a difference in national and international development. In other words, how much wastage and the non-inclusion of the innovation of women causes, and how much loss to economic development the world suffers because of a policy platform that is not ready to help include women, but also because the exclusion of women the financial exclusion of women continues in various forms and in many ways continues unabated in many countries.
And your research, of course, speaks quite a great deal on the exclusion and discussions advancing women's economic empowerment through inclusive financial systems, with those taking center stage. What sort of approach is being discussed around mitigating around the red tape, ensuring that there is better access and women, can access the funds that are being said and spoken to all the time?
Well, to begin with, I think that there is a misunderstanding, right, sometimes up to the highest level of government, where the financial inclusion of women is seen as some kind of charity that is being extended to women in many governments. There's a sense of entitlement to the function of gatekeeping on behalf of many governments and many institutions in society. So we need to get rid of that mentality. The financial inclusion of women is not charity, and it is not mere funding in the bursary sense of the word. This is economic development. It is economic development for the country, of course for the women involved, but for the country and for the global economy. And I think if we can begin to understand financial inclusion in those terms, we will move somewhat forward. And it talks to policy. It's not merely the good-heartedness of those in power at that time. That's why policy becomes very important. But the financial inclusion of women has many non-financial issues, especially on a continent like ours. Do we get the girl children to school? Do we make sure that there are no barriers for them once they have been to school and they want to become entrepreneurs? All of those things have become very important.
As you speak about policy, I know some of the other key themes during the meetings included policy perspective on the care economy, paid and unpaid care work, and household responsibilities. What form did these discussions take?
Well, there is a clear realization that even as we speak now, the actual contribution of women to the economies of the world and even the national economies is greatly understated. And that's part of the excuse for not moving in policy and in the implementation of the policy that exists. So unpaid work by women, and you touched on it, is a very serious problem. What is work and what is not work? And why is it that the work done by women at home And even those who are so-called domestic workers is understated, when in fact it is the backbone of many of the economy. So we have realized that that is part of the problem. We need to start there, because if you don't recognize the contribution that the informal sector, in which many women entrepreneurs find themselves, is making as much contribution to the economy, and sometimes in some sectors even more than the so-called formal economy. So we need to recognize the contribution of women already, and we are prepared as academics and as the University of Tshwane to do a little bit more research on that, so that we don't start on the back foot when we talk about the inclusion of women and financial inclusion of women in the economy.
As you talk about that, I mean, some of the central themes really revolved around reducing the red tape. Women who have businesses that are operating, struggling to either start up or move the business to the next level because there are so many stringent requirements when it comes to accessing those funds. I mean, you speak about policy on one end, but in terms of perhaps an educational and getting these entrepreneurs to get an understanding of the ecosystem and get assisted in accessing the funds, where are the loopholes in that space?
Part of the problem is the assumption that the current financial systems, nationally and globally, are in of themselves ready, and all that is missing is the financial inclusion of women. We have to take a few steps back and recognize that many of these financial systems were built for boys, by boys. They were not built for women. They are not friendly to women. And that's why you have this ridiculous age limit that says if you are 37 or 38, you are no longer a young person and therefore you don't qualify, which doesn't work for women, because for many women, life starts at 40, if you will pardon the pun.
Yeah.
That is after they've brought up their children and so on. Then they become entrepreneurs. Then they do their PhDs if they want to study. So they're always late comers. So there are many rules that by definition exclude women. And we must not assume that all we need is to include women. We need to transform the financial apparatus of our nations and of the world, so that they become women-friendly and women are able to enter and thrive in them. Because women may come in, but do not manage to thrive because the systems were built with men in mind, and sometimes men of a particular race in mind, rather than women themselves. So we need to do two things at the same time. Ensure that we implement the inclusion policies that are available, create new policies for those areas that are without policy, but also ensure that the financial systems are friendly towards women and not built to exclude and to fail women.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, the Tshwane University of Technology Vice Chancellor, reflecting on the G20 empowerment of women working, and of course that discussion highlighting some of the loopholes when it comes to advancing women and women entrepreneurs.